So fittingly, given that tomorrow is networking day, this last day of programming is focused on networks. What does it take to sustain, nurture, and grow a network? How can we, and by we, I mean everyone here, collaborate to build a network that creates global connections to solve real-world challenges? What can we do to spin the flywheel and get the network effects so crucial to Stellar's success? What solutions can an open participation network deliver today? And what about in the future? What is the future of the Stellar network in the year ahead and beyond? A lot of big questions, a lot of fertile ground for great conversations. Networks. To start the conversation about them, we have with us one of the most renowned network builders of all time, Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, and to shepherd that discussion, none other than SDF's CEO and Executive Director, Danelle Dixon. Welcome back to the virtual stage, Danelle.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's great to see you. Sorry about the technical issues. Hopefully I didn't cause them. I wanted to bring on Reid Hoffman. Reid is a friend of mine, someone that I've actually learned a lot from, and we worked together. He was on our board at Mozilla, and I am so grateful for all of the time that he's given me over the years and just the businesses that he's worked with. So thank you, Reid, for joining us today.
My pleasure and honor. And I learned a lot working with Mozilla from you too. I mean, all these questions around open source and governance and how to think about those things, those have been like, critical things for the future of our society, and you are instrumental there, and you're instrumental here.
Well, thank you. It's one of the things we were talking about before we were in the green room, when we talked about the fact that open source is one of those things that it feels like it's becoming more of the thing. And I know that your work with Microsoft and with Satya at Microsoft has really helped to push that forward. So thank you for that. Hopefully we'll see more momentum in that direction.
For sure.
Okay, so we've known each other for a while, but everyone here doesn't know that you're a crypto rap producer. I don't know if you want to talk about, back in 2019, you produced a battle rap music video with centralized and decentralized currencies, pitting Alexander Hamilton against Satoshi Nakamoto. What inspired you to do that?
So one of the things, I'm not as the earliest of crypto adopters, but a number of my friends are, and then they got me involved in it. Obviously, like many of us, starting with Bitcoin, and then kind of moving into more of the decentralized finance and other kinds of areas, and thinking about these things as platforms, which we'll get to. But I also, of course, given that I have a role as a venture capitalist, as a board of Microsoft, going to these kind of these high-scale business conferences, sometimes like society conferences about like what should be happening in society. What I was hearing a lot from the business side was a complete a non-comprehension about the real ideas that were going on within crypto. The kind of things that the banking side was thinking is, oh, this is a get rich quick scheme. It's like equities that don't really have any backing. It's not really paying attention to what are the key things in banking that have to be part of this. And so what I realized, I said, look, what I'd like to do is elevate that discussion in a way that that had kind of like, what are the ideas, to present them in a way that isn't kind of that classic, like, oh, we're boxing. But then I realized Alexander Hamilton, the musical, which like, if people haven't seen, see, and they had these cabinet rap battles, like between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton, and it was a way of expressing ideas and conflict. And I said, oh, this could be a really awesome way of getting some of the central ideas out there, so that people who could listen to it and go, oh, okay, I get it. I get some of the questions that are being there, and it's a question of ideas, not these guys trying to get rich for society, these guys standing for society, but two different ideas about what could be really important for how do we have a better society, how do we have a better ecosystem, how do we have a better platform to build upon, and how do we make ourselves as a society and as individuals better. And so it was like, okay. And then, of course, Hamilton, the original idea, Federal Reserve, and inventor of the U.S., the first part of the centralized U.S. banking system. And then, of course, the Satoshi Nakamoto as the unknown, kind of like, inventor of crypto. And then to have that, kind of stylized debate. And I thought it was great fun. And actually, when I showed it to the banking folks, they all went, huh, that's interesting. as opposed to, oh, we don't take those people seriously. They went, oh, wait a minute, right? Like,
well, it's
oh, no,
such a great way. It's
Yeah.
such a great way to get people to start thinking differently. And so much of it is that, we try to educate, we try to like bring information out. And when you sort of do it dry, it makes it so much harder. But when
Yes.
you do it in that video, to me, I received it in one of the emails that gets sent out for those that follow you. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. It's a
Yeah.
perfect way to do it.
Yeah.
It reminded me a lot of the Burger King. I don't know if you remember when Burger King did the net neutrality, when they did it with when they talked about net neutrality, and it was one of the ways to like bring net neutrality to the forefront in a simple way that everybody could get. And that's what I loved about it. So thank you
Yes.
for doing that.
Yeah, my pleasure. And by the way, if you or other folks have ideas for what, like there should be a second version of it, because obviously part of the reason why we're here, you're doing the work you're doing, this community's here, is because, obviously these open networks as platforms for creating generativity for better patterns in society is the mission. And to get those ideas out there, to understand it's not just about like, oh, look, your cryptocurrency started at $X and got to $Y, and some people made some money out of that. That could be an important part of the system, but it's actually, in fact, these platforms that we're building on that's really important. So if there's more ideas, always welcome.
Yeah, I would love. We'll think about that and we'll bring some over to you.
Yeah.
I think that what you just said is so important. And so if you think about the idea of that this is more than just what the token is worth or the value. In fact, that's not even something that we focus on at all. We focus on what opportunities that we can deliver into the ecosystem, into the different regions of the world that with different needs to get connected to the banking infrastructure. But what opportunities do you see with respect to blockchain and digital currency?
So when crypto, this is the reason I wasn't quite in the first set of dots. When it was first pitched to me, it was kind of like, look, it was kind of like digital gold, something. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And by the way, it goes all the way back to my PayPal heritage, because there was e-gold and cyber gold and all this other stuff around the time, which wasn't really that decentralized. And is here's a certificate that's like a bearer bond for that bar of gold. It's kind of like, oh, okay, that's, I wouldn't say that that's the step forward in the decentralized system, but there was a bunch of those things, but always interesting. And I just kind of like, okay. And then it was like, okay, actually, in fact, it's network as a platform. And in fact, it's network as a platform with kind of a network-driven open source, kind of standard to it that had this kind of, not just obviously the consensus protocols about how the ledger is decided, but consensus protocols about how the evolution of the system is done. And, the protocols are a little squishy and fuzzy in various ways, but still that is as a direction. And I went, okay, this could be super interesting, because the precise thing that made the internet obviously so generative in communications and information and a bunch of the, commerce, a bunch of those things, was having this decentralized kind of protocol. Can we begin to apply that to the instruments of value and value transfer? And obviously, one of the things that Stellar has a high focus on is, well, this also means that we can do things like in Africa, and we can do things in other areas, emerging markets, areas of the world, because the Western banking system is super expensive, not the least because obviously like any commercial organization, banks are like, how do I make a lot more money, right? So they're not like, how do I provide banking services to someone whose net worth is, the equivalent of a quarter or 25 cents, but it's like, how do I make a lot more money? And it's like, actually, in fact, getting everybody within the modern software and electronic system allows them to participate in commerce, allows them to participate in the kind of the evolution of the financial system. And so the kinds of applications, people typically in these things talk about smart contracts. I tend to think a lot about, like I'm on the board of Kiva as well. How do you get kind of the entire kind of software digital data ecosystem functioning as a platform across the entire world, so that everyone can participate, right? Those kinds of applications. Obviously, smart contracts are interesting, but that kind of thing. And then how do you unlock the kinds of things that developers, when you're just given an API, which is not obviously how the banks do in their forward foot. They may be dragged into it, but that's not the thing that they naturally lead on their own. It requires revolutions like cryptocurrency And actually, in fact, sorry, I'm talking a little bit long, and I'll let you get to the next question. But one of the things that I did pretty early is Davos is one of the conferences I go to, and I said, okay, look, I'll give a talk about Bitcoin, and that talk then turned into a Wired UK article because I was saying, look, you guys really think about this as a currency, which is interesting. And then, of course, all the debate is like, oh, is this the one currency to rule them all? Like, no, lots of currencies. It can be just another currency. You don't need to panic that much about it. But the really interesting thing is platform, right? The really interesting thing is what now that there are ability for people to write apps, what comes about? Because some of the things that, like you don't necessarily think about these kinds of amazing platforms. Like when the internet started, people weren't thinking Uber and this kind of mobile network that would reconceptualize transport and how transport works on all kinds of levels, or Airbnb and how travel rental and experiences work like. And that's the kind of thing that you want to enable developers to do.
And I think that's it. It's when you mentioned PayPal and of course your relationship with PayPal from the very, very early days in terms of how of founding it. One of the things that that just happened recently was that PayPal agreed to accept, or is now accepting, cryptocurrencies as part of payment mechanisms, and that is a step forward. And steps like that bring this into the mainstream in these geographies, but it doesn't actually move a whole lot forward in the focal points that we're looking at, which is in the trying to bring those who are unbanked to the banking system. Yes. And so if you think about, like, that's what we're here all week to talk about at Meridian, is really like this network and how you can build this network and solve those problems. What do you think the role of network plays in helping to solve these problems? I mean, you just talked about others building on it and creating different things, but and changing, is it going to change society for the better?
Well, it certainly can. And I think by default, creation of networks that bring out the better aspects of how people work in interaction with each other, then actually have an amplifying positive effect. Now, networks can go both directions in some ways, right? There's terrorist networks too, and there's so networks are not like if it network equal good. Now, more networks, because they tend to, as they get large, tend to be visible to a large chunk of humanity. Humanity tends to want it to be, something that's beneficial to them. Whether it's commercial networks, economic networks, information networks. We're obviously working on problems with information networks in the last few years, right? I mean, it took a lot of misinformation from the president to start going, okay, well, let's start framing these social media things as you should get the facts on this because this is a lie, right? This is not information. And how do we get to those new information, truth, discovery of truth within these things? And so, I think networks can evolve to being super positive because, like, for example, just take information. Like we go through these waves with the internet. You kind of go, okay, well, it starts with, oh, there's a whole bunch of people whose voices aren't heard that now can be heard. And things like, for example, when you have a war like the Iraq War, we're actually hearing from people on the ground, the civilians and so forth, and we're getting an understanding of what's going on. This is enormously positive. There's an enormous step forward in terms of understanding other people, compassion, kind of governing human behavior in various ways. Now, of course, we get to another stage where it's being hacked by, autocratic, malicious intent governments, and it's being and by political actors, and so it's like, okay, so now we need to adjust to that too. But overall, I think networks can lead to that. And so when you get to the unbanked, you go, all right, so one, we can have a provisioning that's much cheaper, which means we include a lot more people and bring them in and then get them started on the system of it. And obviously, once you begin to bring in like, for example, a lot of the areas of the world, like kind of poor farmers into a bank system, they can save, they can get intelligence for, what's, kind of like what's going on in markets. Like, oh, I should take my goods here versus here. I can potentially get loans. So to say, hey, like one of the nonprofits I support is a nonprofit called Give Directly. And part of what they use technology to decide who to just give money to, because people do know, like, oh, if I got $100, this is how it can improve my life circumstances. Not like I can go out and party. And like, for example, the canonical case within GiveDirectly is they figured out there was like people were spending $100 a year to replace their thatch roof. And if they gave them $300, what they did is they went and got an aluminum roof, which then raised their income by $100 a year. And then they could start investing that in the things that they're doing economically and so forth. Well, that's partially like participation in the bank system. You have a good, kind of electronic network in a banking system, then all of a sudden identifying people and giving, doing things like this kind of GiveDirectly philanthropy, which goes directly to how do you improve your household income, now become all the more possible. So that's what I mean by there's like this range of applications, not just the simple, kind of like, oh, well, I now have an easier ability to have cash, to pay with cash, the speed of money, all of which matter, but a variety of other things as well.
I think it's so important to think about the financial infrastructure in not the way that we think about it today. We need to think about it in exactly what you just said about what the needs are and how to solve those needs, which could look different from a banking standpoint than we're used to. So when you built PayPal and LinkedIn, were you always aware of the challenges of needing that counterparty? I mean, that's part of it for us, right? Is to really create a network. You need to have players on both sides to be able to make that move. So were you aware of that at the outset? Is that something you learned about going through it?
Well, at PayPal, when we started it, we were pretty naive and young. We didn't even know what a chargeback was. So like, I've sometimes characterized the PayPal journey as we were moving so fast that the landmines we'd run over would explode behind us versus underneath us, because it was like a full forward motion as a way of doing it. So no, we weren't that familiar with it. Now we knew that it had a network active. That was part of like one of the really central ideas in PayPal. It almost kind of, to some degree, started the whole kind of modern airdrop notion. Yeah. That kind of led to all this, because it was like, oh, it's this, hey, if I bring you on the system, you get $10, I get $10. And that was a way of solving the counterparty thing, because it was like, oh, we'd both have $10 and we'd be here. Now, we had made a decision to do dollars rather than, because those who are old enough to remember this, there are all these services doing beans and flues and other kinds of things, alternative point systems. And we said, look, actually, in fact, you have to be a maximum liquidity and tradability in order to make this work. And that's part of the reason why there's currency exchanges and the major currencies that people trust and believe in. So we'll do that. But we'll do that in this way of trying to bring everybody into the network. And what, of course, that morphed to, which then has also grown in many ways to what PayPal is today, was to say, well, actually, every individual can then become a merchant, can then come transact in the system and get the benefit of doing that, which back at 2001 was I could start doing goods and services through the internet, where previously I'd have to have a relationship with a merchant bank and do all the things that made that happen, which was beyond the vast majority of people and vast majority of individuals, even beyond some small businesses, would now become doable. And that was the way that kind of accelerated commerce. Now, ultimately, we had this idea of the kind of the dollar bonus giveaway, which is like airdrop. But the thing that actually, of course, really accelerated PayPal was going into eBay, because eBay had all of these small merchants, including individuals doing it, who couldn't get to the merchant accounts, were accepting checks at the time, if anyone remembers what those are, right? And we're like, oh, here's the electronic banking system, like a microcosm of what now, kind of Stellar and various DeFi and other kinds of things are trying to accelerate into the unbanked world, is to say, well, that's precisely the kind of thing we're trying to get to.
But then you did it again at LinkedIn. And I mean, in a different way, right? With a different counterparty on the other side, because you always need for the network to be able to grow. So what was it that caused you to think, oh, we can actually replicate this in more of a social setting or a business setting?
So the thing that was interesting, so when I started LinkedIn, one of the things I recommend to all entrepreneurs is go around and ask everyone that anyone who's smart, to give you critical feedback. Like, why won't this work? right? Because you go say, what do you think about my idea? They think you want reassurance, and you say, oh yeah, your idea is great, and that doesn't help you at all. What really helps you is to hear why they think your idea won't work. And so I went on with LinkedIn, following my own advice, and said to everybody, and they said, oh, this is never going to work. And I said, why isn't it never going to work? Well, it's a network, and the first person in, nobody there, no value proposition. Reed invites Danelle in. Reed and Danelle already know each other, no value proposition for each of them. So there's no incentive for inviting. There's no incentive. The network has to get to this very big state before you begins really getting valuable network properties. It's not going to work. And so I looked at this and I said, okay, what do I know that they don't know? Because this is part of what you do when you're thinking as an entrepreneur. And I said, well, the thing that I know that the criticisms don't know is twofold. One is there will be some people who will invite people because they can envision the future. This is a small percentage. And there's other people who invite people because they're just curious. It's just the game. Like you kind of set it up as easy to go invite people and kind of check out this new stomping ground. And between those two impulses, with enough tools and kind of like game mechanics to incent it and so forth, we can get to enough density that the value propositions will kick in. And that was my essential first hypothesis. So yes, until you have those counterparties, until you have the network built out. I mean, 2 months into the growth of LinkedIn, like we were looking at the search log queries because we're trying to say, okay, well, what are people looking for when they've come to a network? We even saw the very first like looking for meat packing experts in China, right? Because I'm trying to solve this problem. It's a network problem, and I don't know how to solve this problem, and certainly doesn't work on Google, right? Maybe it'll work here, and it wouldn't. 2 months in, didn't work on LinkedIn. Probably works today, right? To track down to because in business, in expertise, in a knowledge, other humans are your best counterparties. Well, how do you search the human network that has all of the tags and all the other information for that? That's what LinkedIn is continuing to grow to today. Obviously, most people tend to think, well, job searching and talent searching, which are, of course, mainstream applications. But I'll say one more thing, because this is the surprise in networks. I was talking to an exec who was considering joining, who said to me, oh, I have a great idea for you. People are in companies and they have no idea like what other people in the companies, like their hobbies are and they're doing. And so you should add that as a feature. And I'm like, well, actually, it's already there. So you go and type in like company LinkedIn fly fishing, you will find a set of people in LinkedIn who have put fly fishing into their profile, right? So it is obviously there's a bunch of people who like fly fishing who haven't put it in yet because they haven't really conceptualized being found that way. But that's how these networks grow in interesting ways. Then, of course, once you have enough density of information or transaction or communication flow, then you can start building the additional features on top of it.
I think that, the LinkedIn story, as well as the PayPal story, we have to think about it from our standpoint in terms of what we're doing here at Stellar. And we're laying this foundational network of anchors, which are these financial institutions that are out there. And it feels like that's the right place to start, right? Because you get them and they get connected and then people can build on top of it. But how do you know when you're looking at a business, how do you know what the right place to start is? And if that's the business that you should be in?
Well, early stage stuff, most of the venture stuff, Stellar, things I invest in and so forth, Airbnb, you don't know. You have an investment hypothesis. And so what I recommend people do is they write down, like, here is what we're presuming we can do, or the direction the world's moving in, or the direction the world is. And almost like a logical proof, although not logical proof, like that kind of concludes to our success in our venture and what we're doing. And then you look at that and then you try to measure the parts of that hypothesis as best you can. And obviously it's really nice when you have data like, oh, look, a network's doing this or something else as a way of doing it, makes it much easier. But frequently, the way you're measuring it is you're going, well, what will the psychological, what will the psychology of the human participants in these nodes, whether or not they're individuals or they're organizations, and will that participation, will that mutual investment create a cycle by which the network is growing? And I'll give you an example from Airbnb. When I brought in Airbnb, which was my first kind of Greylock investment, my partner David Z, who was my most valuable board member at LinkedIn, as part of the reason I ended up at Greylock, said, okay, every venture capitalist has have a deal they're going to fail on. Airbnb can be yours. Now, and so I was like, okay, well, David's super smart. What am I saying? And I, think through it and so on. And then, David's credit, 6 months later, nothing really changed because Airbnb is one of these classic stories of like this and then like that. Came to me and said, okay, well, you were right, I was wrong. What did you see that I didn't see? And I said, look, you were absolutely right. Could be a disaster, like a really bad thing happens in an Airbnb rental and it quells it. Local governments fear the future frequently, and with political, leverage from the hotels and everything else that quells it. All of the risks that you talked about, could happen. But if it didn't, right, and we're measuring them, it could be huge, and it totally transforms it. And then this is where you get to the psychology of individuals. Because hosts go, well, I have this asset, my spare room, my apartment, the tree house out back, that every day it's not rented, I lose money, right? It depreciates, I lose it. So I'm motivated to try to make it valuable to want someone to stay in. And then for the travelers, it's like, look, I can go to the hotel. There's certain features, the benefits of the hotel, but boy, that really nice tree house that's in the back of that yard, in Santa Clara, that might be kind of fun. That might be different than, going to, whatever Best Western or whatever hotel. And that could be really interesting. And plus, I'm meeting that interesting family that could show me the local coffee place. If that plays out, that transforms the world. And that's the kind of thing that you're looking at when you don't have the data for the motivation of the human parties who are all investing in these networks together.
I love the idea of investing in the human motivation and the human instinct. They're telling me that our session is over, but I just have one more question for you. So I'm going to push this a little bit. You have been involved in the election here in the United States, and I get asked this question all week. What does a Biden administration do for blockchain and crypto? Anything?
So I don't think they know yet. And I'm certainly not a representative of the administration on this in any way. But what I do know is, particularly unlike the previous administration, they have a theory of governance, and they do think that technology helps society. And so they want to figure out ways in which technology should be amplified and channeled in ways that are helpful. And so the way that they'll approach crypto, and like, for example, they'll love things like unbanked and crossing the digital divide as part of this. They'll be looking for like how can technology be helpful to the large numbers of humanity? Because, by the way, usually the people who are on the bottom of the pyramid tend to be the more numerous, the disadvantaged, the poor, et cetera. And so how can we in particular help them? And technology should be helping with that. And so I think those feet forward with crypto will probably get a much more receptive ear, because they're like, okay, how do we help? And how do we have technology help is, I think, the way that they're starting versus the reality television show that we've unfortunately been in the last 4 years.
Well, you just answered that question far better than I did all week. So thank you so much. Reed, it is so good to see you. So good to talk to you. Thank you for your time and for sharing your space with us. I appreciate it. I'm going to hand it back over to Justin. Go ahead.
Good night with you always. Great.
Thank you.